I want to take this one step further because this is where the conversation becomes deeply personal. Up to this point, we have explored how beliefs shape perception, how emotions influence biology, and how repeated experiences become subconscious programs. But now we arrive at the question that changes everything. If the subconscious mind can be programmed, can it also be reprogrammed? The evidence from neuroscience suggests that it can. For many years, scientists believed the adult brain was essentially fixed. They assumed that after a certain age, the neural architecture responsible for our habits, behaviors, and beliefs became permanent. Today, we know something very different. The brain possesses an extraordinary ability known as neuroplasticity, the capacity to reorganize itself through repeated experience. This changes the entire conversation about wealth, because if our current financial reality is connected to subconscious patterns, and those patterns are stored within neural networks that can change, then our future is not limited by our past. The challenge is that most people attempt to change their lives from the conscious level alone. They create goals. They repeat affirmations. They force themselves to think positively. And sometimes these methods produce temporary motivation, but eventually they find themselves returning to old behaviors, old fears, old emotional reactions, old financial decisions. Why? Because the subconscious program remains untouched. Imagine trying to install new software onto a computer while the operating system continues running outdated code beneath the surface. No matter how attractive the new interface appears, the hidden programming eventually determines the outcome. Human consciousness works in a remarkably similar way. The subconscious mind is not primarily influenced by logic. It responds to repetition. It responds to emotion. It responds to experience. And most importantly, it responds to what feels true. This is where many people unknowingly reinforce scarcity. They may consciously desire wealth, yet emotionally they feel unworthy of it. They may say they want abundance, yet internally they associate wealth with stress, pressure, criticism, or disappointment. The subconscious does not prioritize words. It prioritizes emotional certainty. Whatever emotional state becomes familiar eventually begins to feel safe, even when that state creates suffering. Think about that for a moment. Safety and success are not always the same thing. Many people remain trapped in familiar limitations because the subconscious values predictability more than possibility. The unknown can feel threatening even when it contains the very opportunities we seek. This is why true transformation requires more than intellectual understanding. It requires emotional rehearsal. Researchers studying mental imagery have discovered something fascinating. The brain often responds to vividly imagined experiences in ways that resemble real experiences. Similar neural pathways become activated. Similar emotional responses emerge. The body begins reacting to imagined events as though they carry genuine significance. This insight reveals an extraordinary opportunity. If the subconscious learns through experience, then we can intentionally create experiences within consciousness that begin teaching the body a new reality, not by pretending, not by denying present circumstances, but by practicing new emotional states until they become familiar. When I speak about quantum wealth, I am not referring to magical thinking. I am referring to the relationship between perception, emotion, behavior, and possibility. Every financial decision we make emerges from an internal state. Confidence influences action. Fear influences action. Worthiness influences action. Doubt influences action. The quality of our emotional environment affects the choices we make every day, often without our awareness. And those choices accumulate into outcomes. This means that reprogramming wealth consciousness is not merely about attracting money. It is about transforming the internal conditions that influence our relationship with opportunity. For example, imagine two individuals encountering the same opportunity. One carries a subconscious expectation of failure. The other carries a subconscious expectation of growth. The external situation is identical, yet their interpretations differ dramatically. One sees risk, the other sees possibility. One hesitates, the other explores. One withdraws, the other learns. Over time, these different responses create very different realities. The opportunity itself was never the determining factor. The subconscious interpretation was. This understanding appears repeatedly throughout both modern psychology and ancient traditions of self-development. Across cultures and throughout history, there has been a recurring recognition that the world we experience is influenced by the patterns we carry within us, not because thoughts magically control external events, but because internal patterns shape perception, perception shapes behavior, and behavior shapes results. The subconscious acts as a filter. It determines what we notice, what we ignore, what we believe is possible, what we believe is impossible, and perhaps most importantly, what we believe we deserve. That final point is often overlooked, because wealth is not only connected to knowledge and skill, it is also connected to identity. Many people unconsciously reject greater success because it conflicts with the image they hold of themselves. If someone has spent years identifying as the person who struggles, sacrifices, or survives, abundance may feel unfamiliar. And anything unfamiliar can trigger resistance. The subconscious begins protecting an outdated identity even when that identity no longer serves growth. This is why lasting transformation often begins with a simple but profound question. Who am I becoming? Not what am I trying to acquire? Not how much money do I want? Not what possessions do I hope to accumulate? But who am I becoming at the level of consciousness? Because when identity changes, behavior changes. When behavior changes, patterns change. And when patterns change, outcomes eventually follow. The fascinating part is that the subconscious does not instantly distinguish between an old identity and a newly rehearsed one. Through repetition, emotion, and consistent experience, it gradually accepts the new pattern as familiar. And once familiarity shifts, something remarkable begins to happen within the nervous system, because the body starts responding as though the future version of ourselves is no longer a distant possibility, but rather an emerging reality that is already beginning to take shape beneath the surface of our everyday awareness. And that is where one of the most powerful discoveries about human consciousness begins to reveal itself. Because once that shift begins, we are no longer fighting against the subconscious mind. We are working with it. This distinction is far more important than most people realize. Many personal development approaches are built around effort. They teach us to push harder, think harder, work harder, and force ourselves into change. While effort certainly has value, there is a limit to what conscious willpower can accomplish when the subconscious is moving in the opposite direction. It's like rowing a boat upstream while a powerful current pulls in the opposite direction. The harder we row, the more exhausted we become. But when the current itself changes, the journey requires far less force. The subconscious current influences thousands of decisions every day. It influences how we respond to setbacks, how we interpret uncertainty, how confidently we communicate, how willing we are to take intelligent risks, how we negotiate opportunities, how we manage resources, how we perceive our own value. Most of these processes occur beneath conscious awareness. This is why two individuals with similar intelligence, education, and opportunities can experience dramatically different outcomes. Their subconscious programs are not the same. One of the most revealing discoveries in behavioral science is that human beings often act in accordance with their self-image, even when doing so appears irrational. If someone secretly believes they are destined to struggle, they may unconsciously sabotage opportunities for advancement. Not because they want failure, but because success conflicts with an internal blueprint. The subconscious seeks consistency. It constantly attempts to align external experience with internal identity. This explains why sudden financial success does not always create lasting wealth. Without a corresponding shift in consciousness, people often recreate familiar conditions. The external circumstances change temporarily. The internal programming remains the same. Eventually, the subconscious pulls reality back toward what feels normal. This principle can be observed in many areas of life: relationships, health, career growth, financial behavior. Again and again, the same pattern emerges. The subconscious is always attempting to preserve identity. So if we want a different future, we must become aware of the identities operating beneath the surface. What stories have we inherited about money? What assumptions have we accepted without question? What emotional associations were formed during childhood experiences? Many people carry beliefs they never consciously chose. Perhaps they learned that wealth creates conflict. Perhaps they learned that successful people are selfish. Perhaps they learned that struggle is honorable while prosperity is suspicious. These ideas may remain hidden for decades, yet they continue influencing behavior long after their origins have been forgotten. Awareness becomes the first stage of transformation. Not judgment, not blame, simply awareness. The moment we become aware of a subconscious pattern, we create a space between ourselves and that pattern. We begin observing it instead of automatically obeying it. And that space is where freedom begins. Ancient wisdom traditions frequently emphasize the importance of self-observation. Modern neuroscience is beginning to reveal why. When we consciously observe our thoughts, emotions, and reactions, activity within certain brain networks changes. We become less identified with automatic responses and more capable of intentional choice. In practical terms, this means we can interrupt old wealth programs before they dictate our behavior. Imagine receiving an unexpected opportunity. Perhaps it involves greater responsibility, greater visibility, greater income potential. An old subconscious program may immediately generate fear. Who do you think you are? What if you fail? What if others criticize you? For most people, these thoughts appear so quickly that they feel like reality. But conscious awareness creates another possibility. Instead of automatically believing the fear, we can recognize it as an old program running in real time. That recognition changes everything, because now we are no longer trapped inside the reaction. We are witnessing it, and once we can witness it, we can choose a different response. Over time, repeated choices create new neural pathways. New pathways create new habits. New habits create new results. This is the biological foundation of transformation. The subconscious is not changed in a single moment. It is changed through consistent repetition of new experiences. This is why emotional consistency matters more than occasional intensity. Many people become inspired for a day. Few remain committed for months. Yet, the subconscious learns through repetition. Every time we reinforce a new emotional state, we strengthen the corresponding neural network. Every time we practice gratitude, confidence, possibility, or self-worth, we are teaching the nervous system a new pattern. Eventually, the unfamiliar becomes familiar. The new identity begins feeling natural. At that point, opportunities that once seemed intimidating begin feeling appropriate. Actions that once felt uncomfortable become normal. Decisions that once required courage become automatic. The external observer may call this luck. They may say the person suddenly became successful. But beneath the surface, something much deeper has occurred. A subconscious transformation has taken place. The individual is no longer operating from the same internal blueprint. And because the blueprint has changed, behavior changes naturally. This brings us to one of the most fascinating intersections between consciousness and biology. The body is not merely responding to the world around us. The body is constantly responding to the world within us. Every thought carries a biological signature. Every emotion produces measurable chemical responses. Every repeated mental pattern leaves traces within the nervous system. In a very real sense, our biology becomes a living record of our subconscious conditioning. And if that conditioning can be changed, then the biological response can change as well. The implications of this idea are profound, because wealth consciousness is not simply a mental exercise. It is an embodied state. It involves how we think, how we feel, how we perceive, and how our nervous system responds to possibility. The goal is not to convince ourselves that we are already wealthy. The goal is to cultivate the internal conditions that allow us to recognize, create, receive, and sustain greater abundance. And when those conditions become stable, something unexpected often begins to emerge. People start noticing opportunities they previously overlooked. They start having conversations they would have avoided. They start making decisions from confidence rather than fear. They begin acting as the person they once imagined becoming. At first, the changes appear small, almost insignificant. But beneath those small shifts an entirely new pattern is forming, a new relationship with possibilities, a new relationship with value, a new relationship with the future. And as this new pattern strengthens, we begin to encounter a phenomenon that researchers, psychologists, and consciousness explorers have observed for decades, a point where intention, emotion, attention, and expectation start interacting in ways that challenge many of our traditional assumptions about how reality itself is experienced. And this is where the conversation enters territory that many people find both fascinating and deeply transformative. Because once we begin understanding how expectation influences perception, we start recognizing that reality is never experienced in a completely neutral way. Human beings do not simply observe the world. We interpret it. Every experience passes through filters created by memory, belief, emotion, and subconscious conditioning. These filters determine what we notice and what we overlook. They influence what feels possible and what feels impossible. They shape how we respond long before conscious reasoning has a chance to intervene. Modern neuroscience has demonstrated that the brain constantly predicts reality. Rather than waiting passively for information, it actively constructs expectations about what is likely to happen next. Those expectations influence perception itself. In other words, what we expect to find often affects what we are capable of seeing. Think about someone who believes opportunities are scarce. Their attention naturally gravitates toward obstacles. They notice competition. They notice limitations. They notice reasons why success may not happen. Their perception becomes organized around scarcity. Now consider someone whose subconscious has been conditioned toward possibility. That person notices different details. They recognize connections. They identify solutions. They remain attentive to opportunities that others dismiss. The external world may appear similar, yet the internal experience is dramatically different. This is not because one person is imagining reality and the other is seeing the truth. Both are viewing reality through subconscious filters. The difference lies in the filters themselves. This understanding helps explain why wealth consciousness is fundamentally connected to awareness. The goal is not blind optimism. The goal is accurate perception. A subconscious program rooted in fear often distorts reality just as much as unrealistic fantasy. Fear narrows perception. It reduces creativity. It limits problem-solving capacity. It encourages avoidance. When the nervous system enters survival mode, the brain becomes increasingly focused on immediate threats. Long-term possibilities fade into the background. This response served an important purpose throughout human history. When physical dangers were present, survival required rapid attention to threats. But in modern life, many people remain trapped in chronic psychological survival states. Their bodies react to financial uncertainty as though facing immediate physical danger. Stress hormones rise. Decision-making becomes reactive. Creativity declines. The subconscious shifts into protection mode. And protection mode rarely produces expansion. This is why emotional regulation becomes such a critical component of subconscious reprogramming. Before we can consistently create new patterns, the nervous system must learn that growth is safe. That statement may sound simple. In reality, it is profound. Many individuals consciously desire greater wealth while subconsciously fearing the changes that wealth may bring. More responsibility, more visibility, more expectations, more uncertainty. These hidden fears create internal conflict. One part of the mind moves toward expansion. Another part moves toward protection. The result is inconsistency. Progress begins, then stalls. Opportunities appear, then disappear. Motivation rises, then fades. From the outside, it looks confusing. From the perspective of the subconscious, it makes perfect sense. Two competing programs are operating simultaneously. This is why coherence becomes so important. Coherence occurs when thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and actions begin aligning toward the same direction. When coherence develops, energy that was previously consumed by internal conflict becomes available for growth. We stop fighting ourselves. We stop sending contradictory signals through our behavior. We become more consistent, more focused, more intentional. Ancient traditions often describe this state using different language, yet the underlying principle remains remarkably similar. They emphasized alignment between inner experience and outer action. Modern psychology, neuroscience, and behavioral science increasingly point toward the same conclusion. Human performance improves when internal systems operate in harmony. This harmony influences far more than productivity. It influences presence. People who embody coherence often communicate differently. They make decisions differently. They carry themselves differently. Others sense this, even when they cannot explain it. Confidence, after all, is not merely a thought. It is a state, a biological state, an emotional state, a behavioral state. And states are contagious. We influence each other continuously through subtle signals, facial expressions, tone of voice, body language, attention, emotional energy. When a person consistently operates from fear, those signals reflect fear. When a person consistently operates from grounded confidence, those signals reflect confidence. This creates a fascinating feedback loop. As subconscious programming changes, behavior changes. As behavior changes, responses from the environment begin changing. Those new responses reinforce the emerging identity. The cycle starts strengthening itself. Eventually, what once required conscious effort begins occurring naturally. This is one reason transformation often appears sudden from the outside. Observers witness the visible results. They do not see the months or years of internal restructuring that preceded them. The breakthrough seems instantaneous. The preparation was gradual. And perhaps this is one of the greatest misunderstandings surrounding wealth. Many people focus exclusively on outcomes. They focus on money itself. Yet, wealth is often the visible expression of invisible patterns that have been developing beneath the surface for a long time. Patterns of perception, patterns of attention, patterns of emotional regulation, patterns of belief, patterns of behavior. Change the patterns, and the outcomes eventually begin changing as well. Of course, this does not mean every challenge disappears. It does not mean uncertainty vanishes. It does not mean success becomes automatic. Life remains dynamic. Unexpected events still occur. Difficult decisions still arise. But a transformed subconscious responds differently. Instead of immediately assuming defeat, it searches for solutions. Instead of interpreting obstacles as proof of failure, it views them as information. Instead of collapsing into fear, it remains engaged with possibility. That shift alone can alter the trajectory of an entire life. Because over years and decades, our future is shaped less by isolated events and more by repeated responses. And repeated responses emerge from subconscious programs. The encouraging news is that those programs are not fixed. They are adaptable. They are trainable. They are responsive to experience. Every moment of awareness creates an opportunity to strengthen a new pattern. Every intentional choice reinforces a new direction. Every emotionally meaningful experience leaves an imprint upon the nervous system. The subconscious is listening continuously, learning continuously, updating continuously. And when we finally understand this process, we begin realizing that wealth consciousness is not primarily about acquiring something outside ourselves. It is about transforming the internal architecture through which we experience opportunity, value, creativity, contribution, and possibility. Because the moment that architecture begins changing, something remarkable starts happening within perception itself. We begin noticing connections that once seemed invisible, recognizing patterns that previously escaped our awareness, and sensing opportunities emerging from places we might have overlooked entirely. And that raises an even deeper question about the relationship between consciousness and the field of possibilities surrounding us every single day. Because if perception determines what we notice, then we must ask an even more intriguing question. How many opportunities pass through our lives unnoticed simply because our subconscious mind has been trained not to see them? Most people assume opportunity is something rare, something that appears only occasionally. something reserved for a fortunate few. Yet when we examine the experiences of highly successful individuals across different fields, a different pattern often emerges. They do not necessarily encounter a completely different world. They encounter the same world through a different state of awareness. Where others see obstacles, they see information. Where others see uncertainty, they see potential. Where others see endings, they see transitions. This does not mean they ignore difficulties. It means they interpret difficulties differently. And interpretation is one of the most powerful forces shaping human behavior. The subconscious mind is constantly assigning meaning to events. A financial setback can be interpreted as proof of failure, or it can be interpreted as feedback. A rejection can be viewed as evidence of inadequacy, or it can be viewed as redirection. A challenge can be perceived as a threat, or it can be perceived as an invitation to grow. The event remains the same. The meaning changes. And meaning influences emotion. Emotion influences behavior. Behavior influences outcomes. This sequence unfolds continuously, often without our awareness. That is why mastering wealth consciousness is not simply about changing thoughts. It is about changing meaning. The subconscious responds powerfully to meaning because meaning determines emotional significance. When an experience carries strong emotional significance, the brain pays attention. Neural pathways strengthen. Memories become more durable. Behavioral patterns become more likely to repeat. In this way, our lives gradually become organized around the meanings we consistently assign to experience. Consider what happens when someone repeatedly interprets financial struggles as evidence that they are incapable of success. Over time, that interpretation becomes part of identity. Identity influences expectation. Expectation influences behavior. Eventually, the original interpretation becomes self-reinforcing. Not because it was objectively true, but because it was repeatedly rehearsed. Now imagine a different interpretation. Imagine viewing every setback as information about what needs refinement. Every obstacle becomes data. Every challenge becomes a lesson. Every mistake becomes part of the learning process. The emotional experience changes immediately. The nervous system remains more flexible. Curiosity replaces fear. Engagement replaces avoidance. The individual continues moving forward rather than withdrawing. This is one of the hidden advantages of subconscious reprogramming. It changes not only what we believe about wealth, it changes how we relate to experience itself. And that shift creates a completely different future. Researchers studying expertise have repeatedly found that high performers often possess an unusual relationship with failure. They do not enjoy failure. They do not seek failure. But they are less likely to define themselves by failure. Instead, they extract information from it. This allows them to adapt more rapidly. Growth accelerates because resistance decreases. The subconscious becomes oriented toward learning rather than self-protection. That distinction is crucial because a subconscious program rooted in protection asks, how do I avoid discomfort? A subconscious program rooted in growth asks, what can I learn from this? The answers generated by those two questions lead to very different lives. One contracts, the other expands. One preserves the familiar, the other explores the possible. When we speak about quantum wealth, this principle becomes especially important. The word quantum often creates misunderstandings. Some people imagine instant transformation without effort. Others dismiss the concept entirely. But if we step back and examine the deeper idea, something meaningful emerges. The future is not a single predetermined path. At any given moment, numerous possibilities exist. Our decisions influence which possibilities become reality. Our attention influences our decisions. Our emotions influence our attention. And our subconscious programming influences our emotions. Everything is connected. The subconscious, therefore, acts as a gateway between possibility and action. It helps determine which opportunities we pursue, which risks we accept, which conversations we initiate, which ideas we develop, which goals we commit to. Most people underestimate the cumulative power of these small choices. A single decision may seem insignificant, Yet leaves are rarely transformed by one decision alone. Transformation emerges through thousands of decisions moving in a similar direction. One conversation leads to another. One opportunity opens the door to the next. One skill creates access to a new environment. One relationship introduces a new perspective. Gradually, a completely different reality begins taking shape. From the outside, the result appears dramatic. From the inside, it was built one choice at a time. This understanding brings us back to the importance of daily practice. The subconscious is always learning. The question is not whether programming is occurring. The question is what kind of programming is occurring. Every environment influences us. Every conversation influences us. Every repeated emotional state influences us. Every story we tell ourselves influences us. The subconscious absorbs patterns continuously. If we repeatedly expose ourselves to fear, limitation, and hopelessness, those patterns become familiar. If we repeatedly cultivate awareness, possibility, and self-worth, those patterns become familiar. The nervous system adapts to whatever it experiences most consistently. This means that wealth consciousness is not built through occasional inspiration. It is built through repetition. Small moments repeated daily become powerful over time. A few minutes of intentional reflection, a few moments of emotional regulation, a conscious decision to challenge an old belief, a willingness to take one action aligned with growth rather than fear. These actions may appear modest, yet they gradually reshape identity. And identity is the foundation upon which lasting change is built. The person who consistently thinks, feels, and acts from a new state eventually becomes that state. Not through force, not through struggle, but through repetition. The subconscious accepts what is repeatedly demonstrated. It learns from experience. And once a new identity becomes familiar, something extraordinary begins occurring almost automatically. Choices become easier. Confidence becomes more natural. Opportunities become more visible. The future begins feeling less like something we hope for and more like something we are actively creating. At that stage, we start recognizing that consciousness may play a far greater role in shaping our experience than we once imagined, not because it magically controls the world around us, but because it profoundly influences the lens through which we engage with reality. And once that lens changes, the range of possibilities we are capable of recognizing, pursuing, and bringing into existence begins expanding in ways that most people never stop long enough to fully explore.
One of the most important ideas explored in this discussion is that our lives are influenced not only by what happens around us, but also by the patterns operating within us. This may sound simple at first, yet when we truly understand it, it changes the way we look at success, opportunity, and personal growth. Let's begin with a simple example. Imagine two people walking through the same city on the same day. They pass the same buildings, meet similar people, and encounter similar opportunities. Yet at the end of the day, their experiences are completely different. Why? Because each person is paying attention to different things. One notices problems everywhere. They focus on delays, mistakes, and obstacles. The other notices possibilities. They focus on ideas, connections, and opportunities. The city didn't change. Their perception did. This is one of the most powerful functions of the subconscious mind. It acts like a filter that helps determine what we notice and what we ignore. Most of the information around us never reaches conscious awareness. The brain constantly decides what is important and what is not. Think of it like searching for a specific car model. Before you become interested in that car, you barely notice it on the road. Suddenly, after focusing on it, you start seeing it everywhere. The cars were always there. Your awareness changed. In a similar way, our beliefs influence what we notice in everyday life. If someone believes opportunities are rare, they tend to notice evidence supporting that belief. If someone believes growth is possible, they tend to notice opportunities supporting that belief. This doesn't mean we should ignore reality or pretend problems don't exist. It means we should understand that our minds are constantly shaping how we experience reality. Modern neuroscience neuroscience helps explain why this happens. The brain is not simply recording the world like a camera. Instead, it is constantly making predictions about what it expects to experience. Based on past experiences, memories, and beliefs, the brain creates a model of reality and uses that model to interpret incoming information. This process helps us function efficiently, but it can also trap us inside old patterns. For example, if a person experienced repeated financial struggles growing up, their subconscious may learn to associate money with stress, fear, or uncertainty. Years later, even when new opportunities appear, those old emotional associations may still influence their decisions. They may hesitate, they may doubt themselves, they may avoid risks that could actually help them grow. Not because they lack ability, but because their subconscious is attempting to keep them within familiar territory. This is where neuroplasticity becomes incredibly important. Neuroplasticity simply means the brain can change. For many years, scientists believed that once the brain developed, it became largely fixed. Today, we know that the brain remains adaptable throughout life. Every thought we repeat strengthens certain neural pathways. Every behavior we practice reinforces specific patterns. Every emotional experience leaves an imprint on the nervous system. Imagine walking through a field of tall grass. The first time you walk across it, creating a path requires effort. The second time becomes easier. The 10th time becomes automatic. Eventually, a clear trail forms. Neural pathways work in much the same way. Repeated thoughts create familiar mental pathways. Repeated emotions create familiar emotional pathways. Repeated behaviors create familiar behavioral pathways. The encouraging news is that new pathways can also be created. This means personal transformation is not merely wishful thinking, it has a biological foundation. The challenge is that many people try to change their lives using conscious effort alone. They set goals, they create plans, they make promises to themselves. Yet, beneath those conscious intentions, old subconscious programs continue running. It's like trying to drive with one foot pressing the accelerator while the other presses the brake. Progress becomes difficult and exhausting. This is why emotional work is so important. The subconscious mind responds strongly to emotion. In many ways, emotion acts as the language of the subconscious. When an experience carries strong emotional significance, the brain pays attention. This explains why emotional rehearsal can be so powerful. Athletes have used mental visualization for decades. Before a competition, they often imagine themselves performing successfully. They mentally rehearse movements, challenges, and outcomes. Research has shown that mental practice can activate many of the same neural networks involved in actual performance. The brain begins learning from the imagined experience. This does not mean imagination magically creates reality. Rather, it prepares the mind and body to respond differently when opportunities arise. The same principle can be applied to wealth consciousness. Instead of constantly rehearsing fear, scarcity, or self-doubt, we can intentionally rehearse confidence, capability, and possibility. Over time, the nervous system becomes more familiar with those states. And what becomes familiar often begins to feel natural. This brings us to an important practical lesson. Many people wait to feel confident before taking action. In reality, confidence often develops because of action. Every small step sends new information to the subconscious mind. Each positive experience becomes evidence supporting a new identity. This is why small wins matter so much. A productive conversation, a new skill learned, a healthy financial habit, a courageous decision. These experiences may seem insignificant individually, but together they create momentum. The subconscious begins updating its understanding of who we are. For viewers wanting to apply these concepts, start with awareness. Spend a few minutes each day observing your thoughts about money, success, and opportunity. Notice recurring patterns without judging them. Ask yourself, what beliefs am I repeating? Where did these beliefs come from? Do they support the future I want to create? Next, practice intentional emotional states. Take a few moments daily to imagine yourself acting with confidence, clarity, and purpose. Focus not only on what you see, but also on what you feel. Finally, take one small action every day that aligns with growth. Not a massive leap, one meaningful step. Consistency is far more powerful than intensity. Remember, transformation is rarely a dramatic event. More often, it is a gradual process of replacing old patterns with new ones. As awareness grows, perception changes. As perception changes, behavior changes. As behavior changes, new opportunities emerge. And over time, what once felt impossible begins to feel natural, revealing that the true foundation of wealth may not begin in our bank account at all, but within the invisible patterns of consciousness that shape how we think, feel, choose, and engage with the possibilities of life itself.